You are not a tourist in time. You are a witness, and what you're about to remember may never leave you again. You walk past shallow graves on the outskirts of Toulouse. The air is still, but the earth moves. Beneath mounds of hurried dirt, some still breathe, some still claw. In 1629, the gravediggers didn't wait for the silence of death, only for the stillness of limbs. They buried them with rosaries, and sometimes with screams. You hear it again, faint, ragged, muffled by layers of soil, a voice begging, cursing, praying. It could be your brother, your daughter, yourself. The plague had a rhythm, and it was faster than the priest's last rites. This is not just death, this is being erased alive. If what you're about to witness leaves you unsettled or awakened, consider subscribing. Not for the numbers, but so these buried voices might rise again. If this brings value, leave a like. If it stays with you, leave silence. It is the year 1629. You are a clerk in Toulouse, a city that still echoes with the chants of monks, though they are fewer now. The bells that once rang every hour now fall silent for days. You were trained to copy letters, register births, document deaths. But now, death no longer waits to be written. This is not the first time the plague has visited France, but this return is crueler than memory. They call it the Great Plague of 1629, 1631, a lesser-known wave that struck Provence, Languedoc, Dauphiné, and parts of northern Spain. In Marseille, it began with a single infected sailor. In Aix, a wedding turned into a funeral within days. And in Toulouse, where you live and breathe the air, has changed. The sickness doesn't always come with boils. Sometimes just a cough, a heat in the blood, a fainting, a silence. And when it takes someone, it takes them swiftly, within hours. Hospitals are overwhelmed. Monasteries close their doors not to the sick, but to everyone. Priests now throw blessings from windows. Doctors are few, and most refuse to enter the city walls. And so the task of burial fell to those who remained, the poor, the convicts, the orphaned. You watched as carts rolled through your district, sometimes 3 in a day. The dead were collected or presumed dead. Bodies that had not yet cooled were lifted by poles and dumped into pits just outside the city, and then, quickly, covered. There was no time to wait for certainty. Soon the scratching began. At first you dismissed it. A superstition, perhaps. But then a gravedigger collapsed not from plague, but from guilt. He heard it. Beneath the earth, one of the women he had helped bury was calling his name. Others confessed too, and some tried to dig them up only to find torn fingernails, twisted bodies, mouths filled with soil. They had died not from plague, but from suffocation, from being buried alive. You stop sleeping. You flinch at the sound of wind. You wake at night hearing someone cry beneath your floor, but your house has no cellar. Over 50, 0 are believed to have died in southern France alone during this wave. But how many were actually dead before they were buried? No one can say. You were trained to record truth. But this truth breathes beneath the soil. And now you are the only one left to write it. You don't remember the name of the first one who fell. Not because he was unimportant, no. It's the opposite. He was known to everyone in your quarter. An old porter, half deaf from working at the foundry, always limping. His wife was a laundress who used to bring bread to your mother before she passed. One morning, you heard screaming. Not from pain, from fear. They said he collapsed near the Saint-Roch gate, lips blue, frothing slightly, and that his eyes were wide open but unmoving. No boils, no wounds, no bleeding. He was carried home by neighbours, wrapped in his own cloak, and by sundown he was declared dead. But he wasn't cold. This became the pattern. You watched it unfold from your post at the monastery archive. Names arrived on parchment faster than ink could dry. Whole families erased in 3 days. Men who had been digging graves in the morning were among the dead by nightfall. You remember one boy, only 12, dragging a cart with his mother's body, while his younger sister sobbed behind him. The cart was too heavy. Her arm slipped out and scraped against the stones. No one helped. Within days, no one touched the dead anymore. You are in Toulouse, but news comes by foot from Aix-en-Provence, Narbonne, Carcassonne. The plague is spreading like fire, and the wind is to blame. They say to burn rosemary, hang crucifixes, cover your mouth with vinegar cloth. The monastery tried lighting censers of myrrh and locking all outer gates. It didn't help, because the plague was already inside. You heard the monk fall in the refectory. His face struck the table hard. The sound of his head cracking still rings in your skull. His soup was untouched. You ran to him, but the others pulled you back. He might still be breathing, you cried. And that was exactly why they pulled you away. By the next morning, he was buried behind the chapel with 6 others. No last rites, no confirmation of death. Only a twitch of the leg noted, then dismissed. That was the first time you saw it. The earth shifted slightly a day later. You were out walking near the graves, whispering a prayer not even aloud, and something in the fresh soil seemed to tremble. A twitch, a buckling from underneath. You told the priest. He told you, the mind creates what it cannot bury. But then it happened again, and again. Within a week, 28 people were buried, and at least 3 witnesses spoke of hearing knocking beneath the ground. One, a woman named Beatrice, said she heard whispering. Another, a novice monk, said he saw a hand reach through the loose clay before it went still. You believed them, because you had heard it too. At night, you stopped praying for the dead. You began praying they were already gone before the soil reached their lips. One night, while helping compile a death list from parish records, a man was brought into the cloister courtyard. He had been found in the pit outside the east wall where they tossed the unclaimed. But he wasn't dead. He was breathing shallowly, eyes shut, crusted in mud. His nails were broken. He had bitten off part of his tongue. He had been down there for 2 days. They said he was possessed, that no one could survive plague and burial. But you saw the marks on his wrists. They were made not by demons but by rope. He had tried to claw his way up. He died that night, this time for certain. And still no changes were made, because it was faster to bury than to examine, faster to toss than to mourn. Soon people became numbers. 4 more from the cloth quarter, 3 more from the hospice, 12 from the river district. The names disappeared. The cries were replaced by silence. And the silence was filled by the ever-present thud of dirt being dropped on chests that might still be rising. One of the monks stopped speaking. He simply rang the bell at each hour, mechanically, until someone found him one morning at the foot of the belfry. He had scratched the words, "They are not dead," and then he jumped. You began writing less and watching more. Recording became useless. There were no more ledgers, only scraps of stained parchment. The bishop's orders were clear. Anyone suspected of plague must be removed immediately. Signs of life were no longer relevant. To pause was to risk infection, to hesitate to die. So they rushed. They buried, and the ground began to move more often. Once, on your way to fetch clean linen from a storage hut, you passed the eastern burial trench. It had rained heavily. A dog-thin, wild, ribs showing, was scratching at a sunken patch of earth. You watched, frozen. The dog backed away suddenly and whimpered. The soil buckled. A faint sound escaped something between a gasp and a groan. You ran. You did not tell anyone. You did not sleep that night. Because if the dead are screaming beneath the earth, what kind of living person ignores it? The cart came every morning now. It was no longer the old one with wheels that creaked like bones. That one had collapsed under the weight of 32 corpses, its wooden frame warped by rot and blood. The new cart was made sturdier, lined with rough boards scavenged from chapel pews and broken doors. It stank not of death, but of fat. You had never noticed it before. How much human grease hangs in the air when skin boils beneath sun and flies. The cartmen no longer covered their faces. What was the point? The black swellings came for everyone masked or bare. They wore belts of rope, soaked in wine, to ward off the smell. Some even rubbed ashes under their noses. You did the same, though it made no difference, because the odour wasn't just stench, it was grief. Burned into the walls, caked onto the cobbles, imprinted in your mouth. You were tasked with recording body counts for the monastery register. That became impossible after the 3rd week. Now, You simply marked tallies. Every notch meant a face you would never learn, a child you would never see grow, a woman whose name died with her final cough. And then came the fire. The cart, halfway to the pit, buckled under its weight. Bodies had been stacked so high, their bloated limbs protruded over the edges like branches from a dying tree. One corpse, a man still in priest's robes, burst from the top as the cart dipped into a pothole. His abdomen struck the stones with a noise like wet parchment tearing. His body split, and it ignited. The fire caught fast. The sun had dried everything. The fat beneath the skin, softened by decay, hissed as it burned. One cartman jumped away. The other was slower. His cloak caught fire. He screamed. But what made you freeze was that some of the corpses were moving, convulsing, burning, still alive. The screams rose not from him, but from the pile. The man in robes, the one who burst open, was thrashing. His eyes opened. The whites rolled back as flames ate his chest. You couldn't breathe. The fire spread. It took 15 minutes for the blaze to die. The cart was gone, charred, blackened. A twisted cage of wheels and ribs. The stench was like nothing you'd known. Burned skin, burned cloth, burned wood, and something else. Something inside you burned with it. The abbot ordered no more carts. From now on, the dead were to be left by the gate and fetched by the ash monks. That was the name given to the 3 brothers who volunteered to manage the bodies. They no longer slept indoors. They no longer ate with the others. They anointed themselves with pitch and carried the dead in silence. No words, no prayers, only nods. You admired them until one day you found them laughing. Not out of cruelty, but madness. One was rocking back and forth, eyes shut, saying, "I heard her. I heard her say my name. Under the blanket, she said, 'Don't burn me yet.'" That was the end of the ash monks. 2 days later, one was found drowned in the well. Another had disappeared. The third walked naked into the woods, never came back. The bodies piled again. You tried to light your own fire, in the orchard where no one went anymore. Small, controlled. Just one child's body. She was light, maybe 6 years old. Her jaw had been torn as if she had bitten through her tongue. You wrapped her in linen, placed dried rosemary on her chest, and tried to give her the death she deserved. The flame wouldn't take. You used oil, whispered prayers, waited. Then you noticed. Her eyelids fluttered. Just once. But enough. You dropped the torch. You vomited behind the olive tree. You fell to your knees. You prayed. You sobbed. And then you saw her chest rise once shallow, like the wind brushing parchment. You ran. You never told. She was still there the next day. Burned. Ashes spread by the rain. You don't know whether she had truly lived in that final moment, or whether the flame had merely tricked your eyes. But it doesn't matter, because now, every fire reminds you. Every flicker makes you wonder how many were still breathing when the flame took them, how many choked before they burned, how many turned their faces to the earth, hoping someone would notice and instead found only silence and smoke, and how many of them remember you standing there, watching. You stopped knocking days ago. There was no point. The doors never opened. If they did, it was only to release a smell you'd never forget, that thick, sickly sweetness of death left too long in warm air. You had become something less than a man, more than a shadow, a witness perhaps, or a page in someone else's book. No longer a clerk, no longer a brother, no longer anything but someone who still happened to breathe. And even that was starting to feel like a betrayal. Florence was collapsing in on itself, not with noise, but silence. The bells no longer rang for the dead, too many, too fast. The priests were gone, the nuns were dead or hidden, and the only thing left to carry news through the stone alleyways was the wind and the crows. They watched you. They always did. Today, you heard something that didn't fit. It was not a scream. Those had stopped. It was not weeping. No one wept anymore. It was something far worse, a rhythm, a faint sound of life where there should have been none. You followed it. It led you to the apothecary's house, a familiar place, once filled with herbs, remedies, tinctures. A woman had lived there. You couldn't remember her name, only her laugh, sharp and clear like clean glass breaking. That laugh was long gone. The shutters were closed, but the door was cracked, as if someone had left in a hurry or had been taken. You stepped inside. The light from the hallway flickered. Dust motes danced in the sunbeam, indifferent to your breath. Then, the smell. It hit you like a memory. It always did. You could never get used to it. The scent of meat gone wrong, of linen soaked and crusted with rot, of despair. It was more than smell. It was weight. You moved room by room. Each corner told the same story. Plates still on the table. A bowl of soup turned to mould. A doll lying on its side. Time had stopped, but not for everyone. You reached the stairs. The noise came again. Tap, tap, tap. Faint. Rhythmic. Not pleading, not panicked. Just present. You climbed. At the top, a hallway of closed doors. You tried the first. A bedroom empty but disturbed. Sheets pulled back. A basin overturned. A shoe in the middle of the floor. The second door jammed. You shoved. It gave. Inside, they were waiting. A mother. 2 children. All still. The mother's head tilted back, her mouth open. The boy's arms were wrapped around his sister. She clutched a wooden rabbit. Their skin was marbled, purple-black. The buboes had burst and dried. But they weren't the source of the sound. It came again. Tap, tap. You turned. The wardrobe. You opened it. And there a child. Knees pulled to chest. Skin pale. Eyes enormous in the dark. He looked at you without fear. You crouched. He did not speak. You offered your hand. He stared. Then he whispered, "Are they gone yet?" You nodded, though you didn't know who he meant. You carried him down the stairs, past the mother and siblings, past the mould and dust and ghosts, out into the street, into the glare of day. He squinted, then buried his face in your shoulder. You asked his name. He didn't answer, only whispered, "She told me not to breathe too loud. Death hears." That night, you returned, with a spade. You buried the mother and children in the courtyard. There were no rites, no incense, just earth and your trembling arms. You returned to the chapel. You fed the boy. He did not cry. He ate with the precision of someone who knew each bite was earned. He slept curled against the altar. In the morning, he was gone. No sign of struggle, just absence. You searched, you asked, but no one had seen him, as if the city had swallowed him back, or he had never been. And still the sound. Days later, another house, another rhythm. You found an old man in a trunk, breathing in shallow spurts, surrounded by flies. You found a girl under a bed, holding her baby brother, both silent, alive. Then came the orders. Mass burials, no inspections, no exceptions. If the house was silent, it burned. If no one answered, the doors were sealed. No time, no mercy. The living buried the almost living. One day, you passed a door you once knew. The tailor's shop. 3 scratches on the wood. You entered. Dust, silence. But in the corner, soot handprints. A cupboard half open. Inside, a toy horse and bones. Small, curled. They had hidden. They had waited. They had hoped. But you hadn't come. That night, you dreamed of knocking. 3 times. Then silence. Then knocking back. You awoke with your hands pressed to your ears. You could not unhear it. Florence did not scream anymore. It whispered. Through keyholes. Through chimney flues. Through cracks in old stone. It whispered, "I am still here." You told yourself it was imagination, until you heard it again. 3 knocks, always 3. And when you opened the door, there was no one, but on the ground a small handprint, made of soot. You remember the sound of the bell. It was not just any bell. It was the plague bell. Small, rusted, strung around the neck of the cartman who came only at dawn. He did not speak. He only rang, once, for each soul, and then moved on. Now you carry it. They gave it to you because you were the last one who could walk. Not because you were strong or holy or willing, only because you were still breathing. You had watched Brother Matteo fall face first into his porridge, watched Sister Elodia pray so long her lips turned blue. You had stopped counting bodies when the ink froze in your inkwell. The monastery was empty, echoing. The chapel, once filled with chants, now held only wind and wings. Your first morning with the bell, you stepped outside into the cloister garden, frost on the stones, the smell of rosemary, wilted and blackened. The birds no longer sang, only the crows, ever fat and vigilant. You rang it, once, for Brother Matteo, then again, for Elodia. You buried them with your hands. No time for shrouds. You used old tablecloths. The linen clung to their faces, frozen to their mouths like silence made cloth. You tried not to look, but you always looked. By the third day, your skin had begun to blister. You rubbed vinegar on your arms. You stuffed rose petals in your nostrils. The old remedies felt like lies whispered by the already dead. You rang the bell anyway. Every morning. One ring for each death, until the bell was too heavy. Not in weight, but in echo. One morning there were no more bodies to find. No more cries in the night. No more blood at the stairwells. The monastery had become a tomb, but you still rang it. In case someone heard. In case someone answered. You thought you saw a figure once across the courtyard, near the well. A child, a pilgrim, a trick of the eye. You ran. But when you reached the spot, only footprints in the frost. And then they melted. That night you dreamed of bells. Hundreds, clanging all at once. From towers and trees and doorways, each a name, each a face, each a loss. You awoke with your hands over your ears, but the bell still rang. Not yours. Another. Distant, from the village down the hill. You followed it. You had not left the grounds in weeks, maybe more. The road was empty, frozen mud and old wheel ruts. You passed a shrine the candles long since drowned in wax. You passed a body in a ditch, mouth open, eyes full of snow. Then the village, burned, all of it. You walked through the ash, through collapsed roofs and scorched beams, black bones in black cradles. The well had boiled. The church doors were gone. Only the bell tower stood cracked, leaning. And in the snow beneath it, a bell. Yours? No. Older. Heavier. You touched it. It was warm. You ran. Back up the hill. Back to the stone walls. Back to the chapel where you had once prayed for rain, for harvest, for mercy. You lit every candle. You rang your bell. But no one answered. No one came. In the days that followed, you stopped eating. What was left to feed? You stopped sleeping. What was left to dream? You cleaned the altar, polished the candelabras, swept the dust. You wore your robes, just in case God returned. One morning, you woke to silence. True silence. No birds. No wind. Not even breath. You rose. You took the bell. You walked to the cloister. You rang it. But there was no echo. Nothing. You rang again. Still nothing. You looked to the sky. Grey. Motionless. You set the bell down. You returned to your cell. You wrote one line in your journal. Today I rang the last bell, and God did not answer. Then you lay down. Not to sleep, but to end. You did not fear it. It was already inside you. The silence. It had always been. They found your journal, or perhaps it was only a page. Torn, water-stained, marked with blood where the ink had run out. A single line remained legible. I heard them scream beneath the soil. It was buried with you, but your voice had already outlived your flesh. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. The stones of your chapel cracked. Ivy grew through the altar. Bones turned to dust. But some farmer's shovel, digging for new roots in old ground, one day struck something that rang, a bell, small, rusted, silent. They didn't know what it was. A museum took it, labelled it 13th, 14th century monastic artifact. Function unknown. Glass trapped its silence. Lights warmed it artificially. People walked by. But one child paused, pressed their ear to the glass, and swore they heard a voice. You never thought you would survive this. You didn't. But the memory did. You were one of thousands. Tens of thousands. Names now forgotten. Buried in mass graves with no crosses, no prayers, only earth. And perhaps a faint echo trapped in the soil like breath never exhaled. People today speak of numbers, statistics, charts. But you were not a number. You were hands, and tears, and fear, and hope, and breath, until breath was taken. In your last hours, you were not thinking of God, nor of salvation, only of the boy you buried with a toy still clutched in his hands, only of the woman who scratched her way halfway out of the grave before going still, only of the bell that stopped echoing. They ask now, how did it feel? To live through the plague? And this is the answer. You did not live through it. You simply lived in it, and then you died with it. But your memory lives beyond it, in the sound of crows overhead, in the cold wind over bare fields, in the soft shiver that passes through a room when someone walks where no one should be. And now, someone remembers. You. The dirt did not silence you. The stone did not erase you. The centuries could not forget you. Because now, someone has heard. And they will never hear silence the same way again. If what you just remembered stays with you, consider subscribing to help raise more voices like yours from the soil. Leave a like if the memory lingers. Leave silence if the grief is still too loud. And now, you too remember. And that is enough to keep them from vanishing forever.